What if I told you the music industry killed one of its biggest stars, and everyone just watched it happen? This is the Avicii story they don't want you to know. When Tim Avicii Bergling published that retirement letter on social media, it sent shockwaves through the music industry. Here was an artist at the absolute peak of his powers, earning $28 million annually, walking away from it all. He had performed over 320 shows in a single year, commanding upwards of $500,000 for a single festival set. His songs dominated streaming platforms worldwide. Wake Me Up became one of the first songs to cross 200 million streams on Spotify. Festival promoters were booking him years in advance. Brand partnerships with Ralph Lauren and Volvo made him the face of luxury lifestyle campaigns. Yet in that emotional letter to fans, he revealed something that stunned the industry. He had too little left for the life of a real person behind the artist. But to understand why the king of EDM abandoned his throne, we need to go back to where it all started. A teenager's bedroom in Stockholm, where a musical revolution was born. The bedroom genius. Tim Bergling was just 16 years old when he started experimenting with music production in his bedroom. The year was 2007, and he was inspired by the success of Swedish DJ producers like Bass Hunter and Eric Prydz. Sweden in the 2000s was experiencing what musicologists call the Swedish music miracle, a unique ecosystem of thousands of small music studios, government-supported music education, and collaborative creative communities. Sweden became one of the top exporters of music per capita globally, nurturing talent in an environment that valued musical creation above commercial pressures. Tim was the perfect product of this system. Tech-savvy, introverted, and obsessed with crafting the perfect sound. His victory in a production competition held by Pete Tong in 2008 led to his first record deal. But it was what happened next that would change popular music forever. In late 2011, he released a track that would become legendary, Levels. Tim didn't just create another dance track, he crafted what musicologists call a cross-genre bridge, a song that merged electronic beats with soul, country, and folk influences in unprecedented ways. The impact was immediate and massive. For the first time, EDM wasn't just crossing over into pop, it was becoming pop itself. Tim's production techniques were equally innovative. He mastered the R compression, that pumping effect where the kick drum rhythmically ducks other sounds, creating an almost breathing sensation that listeners found inherently uplifting. Industry insiders noted his uncanny sense of melody. His A&R representative at Geffen said, "It's not the synth or the chords, it's the melody. Nobody did what Tim did, and that's why he kept having hits." But Tim's timing was perfect for another reason entirely. He emerged just as the music industry was undergoing a massive transformation. What happened next turned him into a global phenomenon and set the trap that would nearly destroy him. The perfect storm. The period from 2008 to 2015 created the perfect conditions for an artist like Avicii to explode into global consciousness. The 2008 financial crisis had devastated traditional record sales, forcing major music companies and festival promoters to invest heavily in live EDM events, seeking new revenue streams. Streaming platforms were emerging. Spotify launched in Sweden in 2008, then the US in 2011. Just as Tim was hitting his stride, EDM artists were early beneficiaries of streaming due to the playlist-friendly nature of their tracks and a young digital native audience. The festival circuit was exploding globally. Events like Ultra Music Festival, Tomorrowland, and Electric Daisy Carnival were expanding internationally, creating a superstar DJ economy where a few big names were indispensable to selling tickets. This gave those artists considerable leverage in fee negotiations, and Tim was quickly becoming one of the most sought-after names. Forbes reported he earned $28 million in 2014, placing him number 3 among DJs worldwide. Business analysts noted that EDM DJs often kept a larger share of concert grosses than typical rock bands because of lower production costs. Essentially, one person could generate arena-sized ticket sales. The profit margins were astronomical. By 2015, Avicii could command upwards of $500,000 for a festival set in key markets. But the money was just one part of a larger machine that was being built around him. Brand partnerships elevated him beyond music into lifestyle influence. In 2013, Avicii became the face of Ralph Lauren's denim and supply line, one of the first instances of an EDM DJ fronting a major fashion campaign. His Volvo partnership in 2015 featured him covering Nina Simone's Feeling Good in a campaign targeting young, progressive consumers. These deals likely earned him millions in additional income while positioning him as a mainstream cultural influencer. Meanwhile, his music continued to break barriers. The 2013 album True saw him blending electronic beats with country and folk elements, initially facing skepticism from EDM purists before ultimately being lauded for innovation. Wake Me Up, featuring vocals from Aloe Blacc and acoustic guitar, became a global phenomenon. It was among the first songs to cross 200 million streams on Spotify and topped charts in over 20 countries. If you're finding this deep dive on Avicii insightful, please consider hitting that subscribe button so you don't miss our next deep dive. But there were warning signs that few were paying attention to. In 2012, at just 22 years old, Tim was hospitalized with acute pancreatitis. Doctors attributed his condition to heavy drinking, reportedly caused by his relentless touring schedule. In interviews, he would say he had said yes to too many gigs, and that his calendar was completely out of control. By some estimates, he performed over 830 shows by age 28, a pace that was physically and mentally unsustainable. But the machine around him kept demanding more. The real cost wasn't being measured in dollars, it was being measured in something far more precious: his humanity. The hidden price. What the public saw was the glamorous life of a superstar DJ. Private jets, sold-out festivals, millions of adoring fans. What they didn't see was a young man trapped in a system that treated him more like a product than a person. Tim's struggles with alcohol stemmed largely from performance anxiety, starting as a way to calm his nerves before shows in small clubs. As he told interviewers, "It's not many jobs that you can drink while you work or you're allowed to." A tragically common coping mechanism in an industry where alcohol is omnipresent. But touring life made everything worse. Medical research confirms that chronic jet lag and inconsistent sleep can impair cognitive function and exacerbate mood disorders. Tim was performing in different continents night after night, an Asia tour leg, then immediately back to Europe, creating constant circadian stress. Studies of touring professionals found that 71% reported psychological issues such as anxiety or depression, attributing them to touring conditions like poor sleep, isolation, and high stress. Tim fit this profile perfectly, but unlike a traditional employee, he had no labor protections. As an independent contractor, the standard classification for performing artists, labor laws on maximum working hours, health insurance, and workplace safety didn't apply to his situation. There was no regulatory framework to impose limits on touring frequency or mandate health provisions, even when artists were clearly showing signs of burnout. Meanwhile, Tim's perfectionism was becoming its own prison. Friends and collaborators described him as someone who lived in the studio, tweaking songs endlessly. He could work 16 hours straight on a song when inspiration struck, often neglecting basic needs like sleep and meals. This type of sustained creative focus, while producing incredible music, was mentally and physically draining. Research on perfectionism in musicians shows that those with high self-oriented perfectionism experience more stress and physical ailments, exactly what Tim was experiencing. The 2012 pancreatitis was just the beginning. After developing acute pancreatitis from alcohol abuse, Tim became dependent on prescription opioid pain medication, particularly Percocet. This created a vicious cycle. Physical pain from pancreatitis led to painkillers, which themselves caused dependency and mood alteration. In 2014, he underwent surgery to remove his gallbladder and appendix, requiring more recovery time and more medication. But the industry pressure never let up. Even during medical crises, reports suggest that doctors urged him to cancel shows for surgery, but the producer declined under pressure to finish his album, a telling indication of how commercial momentum overrode health concerns. Tim's public persona only made things worse. He was often portrayed as a humble, introverted Nordic star who contrasted with the brash, hedonistic stereotype of the superstar DJ. This meant that when he struggled, it was seen as incompatible with his image rather than a natural human response to impossible pressures. In interviews, he would describe his life as all about stress and admit that there was never an end to the shows. The breaking point was coming, and when it hit, it would shock even his closest allies. The breaking point. By 2014, Tim Bergling was trapped in a machine of his own success. He had performed an estimated 320 shows in a single year, a pace that medical experts now recognize as physically impossible to sustain without serious health consequences. The warning signs were everywhere, but the industry was too invested in the Avicii brand to pump the brakes. The interventions that were attempted were inadequate for the scale of the problem. Tim cancelled dozens of shows in 2014 and again in 2015 to recuperate, but addiction specialists note that short rehab stints may not suffice for long-term recovery, especially if an artist returns to the same stress environment immediately. An 11-day detox in Ibiza, shown in the documentary, was arguably not enough for someone dealing with both physical addiction and the underlying psychological pressures that drove it. The 2017 documentary Avicii: True Stories provided an unprecedented window into his mental state during this period. In candid moments, he admitted, "My life is all about stress," and described feeling completely overwhelmed by the demands of fame. The documentary showed a young man who looked exhausted, anxious, and disconnected from the joy that had originally driven his music. His family became more involved by 2017. His father class began traveling with him, and friends tried to keep him away from alcohol. But by then, the psychological damage may have been irreversible. Tim fired his longtime manager in late 2016, asserting control when he felt management wasn't aligned with his well-being, a sign that he was trying to take back agency in his life. Yet the pressures remained. Even after retiring from touring, Tim continued to struggle with the perfectionist torture that had defined his career. He was working on new music, trying to find meaning in creation without the validation of live performance. His family's posthumous statement described him as an overachieving perfectionist who traveled and worked hard. The tragedy of Tim's situation becomes clear when you apply clinical frameworks for understanding suicide risk. According to the interpersonal psychological theory of suicide, 3 things can lead someone to want to die. 1. They feel like they're a burden to others, like their existence is just causing problems. 2. They feel really alone and disconnected from people. 3. They've gotten used to physical or emotional pain, maybe because of things like self-harm, so the idea of dying doesn't scare them as much. Tim exhibited signs of all 3. He felt responsible for disappointing fans and business partners. He was isolated by the demands of fame, and years of risky drinking and prescription drug use had increased his pain tolerance. By early 2018, he was in Oman, reportedly seeing a therapist and trying to recover. His retirement should have been the end of the story, a cautionary tale with a hopeful resolution. Instead, it was just the beginning of an even more tragic chapter. The unthinkable tragedy. On April 20th, 2018, the news that would shatter the music world forever. Tim Bergling, known to millions as Avicii, was found dead at age 28. The initial reports were vague, but the family's later statement confirmed what many feared. He had died by suicide. The global response was immediate and overwhelming. Within days, #Avicii trended worldwide with over 5 million tweets, as fans from Stockholm to Sao Paulo shared memories and condolences. In Stockholm, thousands gathered at Sergel's Torg for an impromptu memorial dance party, turning grief into collective celebration of his music. Similar tributes occurred globally. Fans painted murals, held tribute club nights, and started support groups linking Tim's story to mental health awareness. But the response from the music industry was different this time. This wasn't just another celebrity death. This was a reckoning. Calvin Harris, David Guetta, and dozens of other major artists shared not just condolences, but reflections on the pressures they all faced. A content analysis of EDM press before and after Tim's death found a notable increase in articles addressing burnout, therapy, and artist welfare, indicating a genuine shift in industry awareness. The DJ mag long read by Shortledge explicitly positioned Tim's death as a wake-up call for the entire industry. The family's response was equally powerful. Rather than retreating into private grief, they made a conscious decision to use Tim's story as a catalyst for change. Their statement read, "Tim was not made for the business machine he found himself in. He was a sensitive guy who loved his fans but shunned the spotlight." This wasn't just personal testimony, it was a public indictment of industry practices that prioritize profit over human well-being. They announced the establishment of the Tim Bergling Foundation, dedicated to suicide prevention and mental health advocacy, specifically within the music industry. The foundation's mission statement was clear: no other family should have to endure what they experienced. But here's what nobody expected. His death would trigger the biggest change in music industry history: the industry reckoning. The months following Tim's death saw an unprecedented transformation in how the music industry approached artist welfare. Major conferences like IMS Ibiza dedicated entire panels to mental health discussions, with industry executives participating in hour-long discussions about preventing future tragedies. Live Nation announced partnerships in 2019 to provide free counselling to artists on their tours, a direct response to the recognition that touring artists had been left without adequate mental health support. Agencies like WME and CAA reportedly began urging their artists to pace tour schedules more sustainably, moving away from the more is always better mentality that had dominated the industry. The Music Managers Forum in the UK issued guidelines in 2019 for managers on recognising burnout and encouraging artists to seek help, acknowledging a moral obligation that hadn't previously been formalised. But the changes went deeper than policy. The culture itself was shifting. Studies of fan discourse showed that after Tim's death, fans became more open about discussing their own mental health struggles on forums, citing his story as inspiration to seek help. This represented a form of therapeutic emulation, where fans model attitudes based on an artist's narrative. Tim's frank admissions of anxiety and the tragedy of his suicide prompted many fans to publicly share their feelings and encourage one another to not suffer in silence. The destigmatization effect was measurable. Research comparing social media sentiment before and after 2018 found increased discussion of therapy and mental health resources among EDM fan communities. Artists themselves began speaking more openly. Performers who had previously maintained the invincible superstar image started admitting their struggles and taking visible breaks for mental health. The Tim Bergling Foundation became a driving force for systemic change. Tim's father, Ralph Bergling, became an advocate for suicide prevention initiatives specifically targeting the music industry. The foundation funded research into the mental health impacts of touring, supported therapy access for emerging artists, and lobbied for better industry practices. They also carefully managed Tim's posthumous legacy. The 2019 album Tim was completed using only material Tim had left, with producers stating that no AI was used to generate anything new. The family framed its release as honouring his vision while donating proceeds to charity, setting a model for how posthumous releases could respect artistic integrity rather than just generate profit. The economic impact was significant too. The streaming economy that had helped create Tim's success began evolving in response to the mental health crisis. Artists started choosing sustainability over scale, shorter tours, longer breaks between albums, more selective about opportunities. This represented a fundamental shift from the always say yes mentality that had characterized the 2010s music industry. But the most profound change was cultural, the lasting revolution. 6 years after Tim Bergling's death, his impact on the music industry extends far beyond his musical innovations. He accidentally triggered a revolution in how the entertainment industry thinks about mental health, labor practices, and artist welfare. The statistics tell the story. A 2020 survey found that 73% of independent musicians report mental health issues, but the percentage seeking professional help increased dramatically after 2018, suggesting that Tim's story helped break down barriers to accessing care. Major record labels now routinely include mental health resources in artist contracts, something that was virtually unheard of before 2018. Tour contracts increasingly include provisions for mental health breaks, maximum consecutive show limits, and access to therapy while on the road. Reframe and resolution. Tim Bergling walked away from $20 million a year to save his life. He couldn't save himself, but his story is still saving others. The introverted Swedish teenager who accidentally conquered the world with bedroom-produced melodies ended up revolutionizing how the entire music industry treats its stars. His songs like Levels and Wake Me Up became the soundtrack to Saturday nights for an entire generation, providing the sound of collective euphoria at festivals and clubs worldwide. But his true legacy isn't just musical, it's systematic. He forced an industry to confront the human cost of its practices. His death became the wake-up call that forced the industry to grapple with how to prevent incidents like this. Today, artists openly discuss mental health without career consequences. Tour schedules are designed with sustainability in mind rather than maximum profit. Record labels provide therapy access as standard practice. The Tim Bergling Foundation continues to advocate for suicide prevention and artist welfare, ensuring that his family's tragedy becomes protection for other families. In 2016, when Tim wrote that he had too little left for the life of a real person behind the artist, he was describing a problem that went far beyond his individual struggles. He was diagnosing a system that treated human beings as content-generating machines, rather than people with limits, needs, and vulnerabilities. His retirement was an act of self-preservation. His death became an act of industry transformation. Sometimes the greatest legacy isn't the music you leave behind, it's the lives you protect after you're gone. Tim Bergling's bedroom experiments in Stockholm changed how the world dances. His struggle with fame changed how the world treats its dancing masters. The boy who conquered the world by accident ended up revolutionizing it on purpose. Well, I hope you enjoyed that video. Please do consider subscribing to the channel if you found value in this. Oh, and YouTube thinks you will like this video. Do watch it before you leave.